Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
We have received unconfirmed but terrifying reports from inside the Bureau of Prisons regarding Sean Diddy Combs, the man who went from music mogul to federal inmate. The news is grim. The situation is dire.
Will Sean Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. I think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations, that's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard. By the way, it's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where
and officials on the ground are reportedly gripped by a singular, paralyzing fear he may not survive the night. We have been covering the brutal reality of Diddy's incarceration, the knife attack in the Metropolitan Detention Center, the constant threats to his life. We knew the prison environment was hostile, but the level of violence now being reported goes beyond simple intimidation. This is a full-scale, devastating assault. According to initial, highly sensitive reports filtering out from the facility, which we cannot name due to the security lockdown, Diddy was the target of a brutal, unprovoked attack by multiple inmates. This was not a quick shift to the throat intended as a warning, this was an overwhelming, violent barrage. Sources indicate Diddy was allegedly discovered by correctional officers in a state of extreme distress, suffering from severe injuries following the vicious encounter. He was reportedly found unresponsive, or barely clinging to consciousness, forcing an immediate emergency response from prison medical staff. The facility was locked down instantly.
In her intimate life with Combs, including what they called freak-offs. Jane and Sean Combs had threesomes too. When Jane and Combs watched pornography together, Jane testified that she contacted two different porn stars and invited them to join her and Mr. Combs. Both Miss Ventura and Jane testified that very often they would see the same men over and over again for years. In July of 2024, Jane testified, for instance, that she suggested to Mr. Combs that they call Paul. Jane explained that she told Combs she, quote, missed Paul. When asked why she said that, she responded, because I did. This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate
and an external medical team was reportedly summoned under the cover of darkness. The phrase being whispered among federal officials, the one that sends a chill down the spine of this entire situation, is a direct quote from a person involved in the initial response, "We may be losing him." We have been covering the brutal reality of Diddy's incarceration, the previous knife attack in the Metropolitan Detention Center, and the constant threats to his life. We knew the prison environment was hostile. The severity of his injuries is reportedly critical, requiring life-saving measures right there inside the prison walls. For a man who lived his life in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the best care money could buy, he is now reliant on the under-equipped, overwhelmed medical staff of a federal prison to keep him alive. The irony is as sharp as the weapon allegedly used against him. Why the attack? Why this extreme violence? The answer lies in his notoriety and the specific nature of his convictions. Diddy was convicted of transportation for prostitution, a crime viewed with absolute disgust and zero tolerance within
human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges, they probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility, such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk.
In the internal, brutal hierarchy of the prison system, inmate Combs' fame, his immense fortune, and the sensational details of his case make him the ultimate target, a trophy kill for any inmate seeking to gain status, or simply, to exact their own form of rough prison justice. His lawyers had warned the courts repeatedly about the danger. They fought desperately to move him from the notorious Metropolitan Detention Center, the hell on earth where he previously faced a knife threat, to a safer, lower security facility like Fort Dix, a transfer that thankfully did happen recently, but that apparently was not enough to save him from the violence that followed him. The reports suggest that even in the lower security environment, the mark on his back was too visible, the target too large. The Bureau of Prisons is now facing an unprecedented crisis. If a high-profile inmate like Sean Combs were to die under these circumstances, it would trigger a catastrophic, global scandal, forcing multiple federal investigations into the security failures, the staffing issues, and the pervasive violence
risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too. Home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen.
That plagues the system. Every official, from the warden to the attorney general, will be bracing for the fallout should their worst fear be realized. While Diddy was recently moved from the notorious MDC in Brooklyn to the Federal Correctional Institution at Fort Dix, New Jersey, a move his lawyers secured precisely for safety, the threat apparently followed him, according to initial, highly sensitive reports filtering out from sources connected to the system. Diddy was the target of a brutal, unprovoked attack by multiple inmates. This was not a quick shiv intended as a warning. This was an overwhelming, violent barrage. Sources indicate Diddy was allegedly discovered by correctional officers in a state of extreme distress. suffering from severe, life-threatening injuries following the vicious encounter. He was reportedly found unresponsive, or barely clinging to consciousness, forcing an immediate emergency response from prison medical staff. The facility was locked down instantly, and an external medical team was reportedly summoned under the cover of darkness. The phrase being whispered among federal officials.
Even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point, but it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting into some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on, to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict, but for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by today's decision.
So, Elizabeth, let's talk about what happened next, because right after the verdict, it goes into the idea of, can he be released on bail? Okay, and the judge set a hearing for 5 p.m. So later on today, you literally, at the time of this recording, just got out of there. Remember, from a legal point of view, the burden is on the defense to show that Sean Combs is not a danger or won't flee. What was the judge's decision, and why did the judge decide that?
Well, given that the top of our show, Jesse, or the top of your show, because it's a sidebar presented by Law and Crime with the host of Jesse Weber, but given at the top of the show that we didn't announce that Sean Combs walked out of this courthouse, I think it was kind of a little bit of a spoiler for the viewers here that the judge decided to keep him behind bars until his sentencing hearing. So I did see kind of a little bit of disappointment from both Sean Combs and his family after the judge made his decision. So the judge said that the jury convicted the defendant on count 3 and 5. That being the Mann Act. He says bail is denied because the government correctly noted that detention is mandatory and it's not appropriate for Sean Combs to be released on bail given the charges that he's still been convicted of. And so the judge says that they disagree with the defense's argument, saying that any felony under 117, and Jesse, you probably know that more than me, requires detention. And he said even if the defendant is required to not be likely to present a danger to the community, the judge even kind of pointing out just some of what we had heard during the trial, where the defense conceded that the defendant, Sean Combs, was violent. The judge said, we own the domestic violence. And that was a word that he took from the transcript because Mark Agnifilo had said that in open court. He told the jurors that, and he told them that multiple times. And the judge pointed it out multiple times from the transcript. He says that the defendant's concession as to domestic violence wasn't necessary. He pointed out Mark Agnifilo's closing, where he says it's horrible for Miss Ventura what she had gone through, and that domestic violence is the issue, kind of even pointing to her Instagram statement that she had made after the 2016 video was released on CNN. And again, the judge was saying that the video is very much domestic violence, even kind of pointing to the London hotel incident, saying where Mark Agnifilo had pointed out that obviously something happened, that he was violent at times, and that conceding the defendant's violence, that he even poses no danger, that he was pointing to violence happened after the HSI raids in March of 2024, because they kind of pointed to what had happened to Jane just a couple months after, and pointing back to the June 2024 incident, which was just a little more than a year ago to this day. And so for those reasons, and just some more reasons too, the judge decided that the defendant will remain behind.
The one that sends a chill down the spine of this entire situation is a direct quote from a person involved in the initial response: "We may be losing him." The severity of his injuries is reportedly critical, requiring life-saving measures right there inside the prison walls. For a man who lived his life in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the best care money could buy, he is now reliant on the under-equipped, overwhelmed medical staff of a federal prison to keep him alive. The irony is as sharp as the weapons allegedly used against him. Why the attack? Why this extreme violence? The answer lies in his notoriety and the specific nature of his convictions. Diddy was convicted of transportation for prostitution, a crime viewed with absolute disgust and zero tolerance within the internal, brutal hierarchy of the prison system. Inmate Combs' fame, his immense fortune, and the sensational details of his case make him the ultimate target, a trophy kill for any inmate seeking to gain status, or simply, to exact their own form of rough prison justice.
We're at another hearing prior to that, but then later.
We'll talk about that. Didn't Mark Agnifilo push back a little bit? Didn't he push back on the judge's decision a little bit? He had some things to say.
A little bit or a lot of it, Jesse? I think it was more kind of a lot of it. So during the defense's argument there, Mark Agnifilo making these arguments, he said, Your Honor sat through this entire trial. As good as, probations are, you sat through this trial. And they were kind of really pushing for an expedited sentencing hearing. They said that they were willing to waive all those interviews with the probation office and all the different services that the defendant, I guess, has to go through. They were willing to do all of that. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because Sean Combs has already spent a year behind bars. If he were to have an expedited sentencing, it's more likely that he wouldn't be spending so much time with a year already served. So I understand why the defense was making that argument. But Mark Agnifilo also saying that he understands there was a divide between the parties on what to do next. He says other Mann Acts cases are not remotely similar. He said other cases have to do with minors, or the defendant is considered to be a pimp, and that Sean Combs is entitled to a below guideline sentence. Mark Agnifilo saying that the circumstances aren't related to the family. What's different about this case, and he's kind of citing different cases here, is one pimp who made money off of dealing with prostitutes, $1.4 million. He pointed out another specific case where the defendant was with a minor and was out pending sentencing. He pointed to a massage parlor who made $1.4 million too, using prostitutes in their parlor. And then he even pointed out a previous sitting governor of New York who used prostitutes, and he pointed out that he wasn't even charged by SDNY. And so the defense really kind of pushed back on the judge's decision, and Mark Agnifilo made a really impassioned argument, but the judge really kind of wasn't budging. I think Mark Agnifilo thought at one point maybe the judge would budge a little bit or maybe reconsider, but that didn't end up happening.
Yeah, usually in order to get something expedited here, they would say like a delay would result in significant harm or prejudice to the defendant's rights. And I'm sure that's going to be an argument they might make, because when is this expedition hearing? When is this hearing on whether or not to expedite sentencing? And by the way, what is the sentencing date that's currently on the books?
Well, the sentencing date currently on the books, and if you guys are Mean Girl fans, you probably know this date. It's October 3rd of this year. And so that was the date that the judge proposed. Now, whether or not that date will actually be moved up, that's still kind of a wait and see, because there is a hearing just next week. It'll be next Tuesday. It will be a little bit different than the previous hearings, especially during pre-trial, in that it's going to be remote. So unfortunately, Sean Combs will not be present inside that courtroom like we're normally used to seeing him. It's going to be held remotely at 2 p.m. on July 8th.
Okay, and that'll be interesting to follow. Now, Elizabeth, going back to something, when the verdict came down, a lot of reaction. I talked about the people outside, but there was reaction. There were statements from the government, right? There was a statement from the Department of Justice, actually the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. There was reaction from Cassie Ventura's lawyer. And also, speaking of Cassie's lawyer, when it came to submitting letters to the judge today, right, there were people who submitted letters to the judge regarding the bail, and that there was a concern if Sean Combs would be released. What can you tell us about the letters that people submitted in the wake of this verdict?
Well, two of the letters that we know of is one from Cassie Ventura through her attorney, Doug Wigder, which I'm going to read in part, Jesse. It says, "We write as counsel for Cassandra Ventura."
His lawyers had warned the courts repeatedly about the danger. They fought desperately to move him from the MDC, the hell on earth where he previously faced a knife threat and survived only by the grace of luck and timely intervention, to a safer facility. The move to Fort Dix was an admission of the danger. But the latest reports suggest that even in a lower security environment, the mark on his back was too visible, the target too large. The Bureau of Prisons is now facing an unprecedented crisis. If a high-profile inmate like Sean Combs were to die under these circumstances, it would trigger a catastrophic, global scandal, forcing multiple federal investigations into the security failures, the staffing issues, and the pervasive violence that plagues the system, every official, from the warden to the attorney general, will be bracing for the fallout should their worst fear be realized. We are watching every hospital, every federal filing, and every correctional source for an official update on his condition. His family, who fought so hard for his safety during the trial, is reportedly waiting in agonizing suspense, unable to fully reach him or secure his release to an external facility. Their fear right now is unimaginable. The man who once demanded the world pay attention to his music and his brand is now demanding attention for a very different reason, a desperate fight for his own survival, a fight that, according to officials, is poised on the edge of catastrophe. We will update this feed the very second we have confirmation regarding his status. Until then, the clock is ticking on the life of Sean Diddy Combs, and the officials fear he may not survive the night. We are watching every hospital, every federal filing, and every correctional source for an official update on his condition. His family, who fought so hard for his safety during the trial, is reportedly waiting in agonizing suspense, unable to fully reach him or secure his release to an external facility. Their fear right now is unimaginable. The man who once demanded the world pay attention to his music and his brand is now demanding attention for a very different reason, a desperate fight for his own survival, a fight that, according to officials, is poised on the edge of catastrophe. We will update this feed the very second we have confirmation regarding his status. Until then, the clock is ticking on the life of Sean Diddy Combs, and the officials fear he may not survive the night.